Too Much Information is a production of iHeart Radio.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Too Much Information, the show that brings you the secret histories and little-known fascinating facts and figures behind your favorite movies, music, TV shows, and more. We're your two frozen in ice, freaky, phantasmagorical film buffs. I'm Alex Heigl.
And I'm Jordan Runtagh.
And Jordan, today is the day I pay you back for making me sit through 17 hours of Large Boat, the James Cameron story, by tanking our traffic numbers for the month, and at long last, bringing my favorite director of all time into the TMI fold. That is right. We're talking about John Carpenter and one of his two magnum opus. What's the plural of opus?
Opie works for me. That sounds like a Greek pizzeria, but I'll go with that.
One of his two magnum opus, along with Halloween, The Thing, probably the greatest, least SEO-friendly sci-fi horror masterpiece of all time. The Thing movie, with The Thing. Just a guy from Jersey. The movie with The Thing. It's a sci-fi cosmic horror beyond comprehension. The Thing. The ultimate in alien terror. Man is the warmest place to hide. Hey.
The real monster is us.
The real monster's us. And the Knicks. Bing bong. No, Knicks won the other night. Yeah. Oh god, it's one of the greatest movies of all time. And even if it wasn't, it would be grandfathered in solely because of the rubber. The sweet, sweet piles of rubber, of moist, dripping rubber. One of the editors in the film talks about, he's like, my memories of The Thing are mostly of walking in and seeing like 5-gallon buckets of KY jelly strewn around everywhere. I didn't know you could order it in such high quantities. Because that's what they use for all this. They use it in The Predator too. When the Predator's blood is glow stick fluid and mixed with KY jelly.
Oh, that's good. Glow stick. Yeah. I feel like it's an underutilized thing to use in stuff like this. Wow. I mean,
there's a YouTuber I like who Thought Slime is the name of the channel, and then he has one about horror movies called Scaredy Cats, and he coined the term wet puppets for really amazing practical effects, because when you start like reading about this stuff, it is so funny how these guys were just like, yeah, we just crammed like garbage into it. Just I think the one for the scanners head explosion, he put like corn chips and like old food into it, and then they just blew it up with like a shotgun.
That's like the famous GIF, right? Just like the guy in the suit.
Yeah, would not have passed OSHA at all. They were doing, in Canada, and they were like, he just like plugged all this crap into this latex head, and then they cleared the set, and we're watching playback from like remotely, and the FX guy just like crouched underneath it and fired a shotgun at it. It's just like this in American Werewolf in London. Like, it's just like the Mount Rushmore of practical effects, the highest the art form will ever be, because computers started to get good enough to kind of take it over. And it's just so good. And it would be great for that, even if it didn't have someone like John Carpenter kind of at the top of his game, because it has that command of editing and pace and composition that like something like Halloween does. But instead of a William Shatner mask, you get a young Rob Bottin hospitalizing himself with the effort of creating all this stuff.
A melting dog.
A melting dog. That was the one that really got you, huh?
Yeah, it did.
Which is funny because that's Stan Winston. That's not Bottin. But yeah, so I am the horror movie person in our relationship, and you don't like them. And so I made you watch this. And your thoughts?
I wouldn't say that I don't like them. I just have very little exposure to them. I texted you immediately before sitting down to watch this, saying that I spent all of my 35 years up to this point believing that The Thing was a Stephen King adaptation. So I truly didn't know what to expect. That's where I was coming at with this. And, you'll be pleased to know that I actually really liked it a lot.
That does warm my heart so much.
I know. I really enjoyed it. I mean, the only stuff that I wasn't all that into, again, because I'm not a horror buff, was all the grotesque practical effects stuff, and that's just purely because I'm squeamish about blood. And even those I have a begrudging respect for. I mean, like the dog's head ripping itself into quarters, leaving its tongue flapping around.
Yeah.
Did I need to see that? No, but I'm extremely impressed with the execution.
And it's like a little bit of was that I was saying. I don't like torture porn. Like I don't like the
Saw.
subgenre. Yeah, exactly. I don't like the subgenre of horror that just gets into like, because there are these two really low budget movies that kind of hit one after the other in the past couple of years called Terrifier, that is literally just a clown like it's disgustingly murdering people. They are really like people left the theater and like passed out and threw up and all this stuff. And I don't like that stuff at all. But this, like the stuff with like The Thing is, to me, it's like I said earlier, it's like a Tex Avery cartoon. Like it just becomes so much of just like, what is happening?
It got easier as it went on. The first really grotesque thing. Well, there were two images, and they happened to be, I think, the first things that you see of this ilk in the movie was the guy in the frozen, bombed out Norwegian control center who was dead.
Oh yeah,
and the frozen blood.
Yeah,
just
bad.
the blood icicle, and then the dog. That was being inhabited by the titular thing, ripping itself apart with its tongue flapping around. And I think those were the two like truly graphic things that you saw on the screen. And then after that, I kind of just was desensitized.
If you put yakety sax under it, it gets a lot easier. Just the guy's head stretching off like the little head skittering around.
Yeah. I forgot about that. Yeah. No,
Yeah.
I mean, aside from all of that, I really just from a plot perspective thought it was really well done. And I'm sure there are terms and tropes that, as a non-horror guy, I don't know, but I love the whole Poseidon adventuredness of it all, where you start off with a big crew and you know that a bunch of them are about to get whacked in ridiculous imaginative ways. And that's you wonder who's going to be the one that's the one that betrays everybody and the one that, is the saddest death. And
it's kind of like the it's like the Treasure of the Sierra Madre meets like Alien, where it's like it's just like the monster was us.
You're right. Yeah.
But yeah, oh man, Kurt Russell, man,
I had never really seen him.
What a hunk! What a big beardy hunk he is.
I'm embarrassed to tell you this. I've seen him more in like the computer wore tennis shoes and like Disney movies than I have in like Escape from New York era type action roles. It was like I'd say 70% Disney stuff and then 30% Goldie Hawn rom-coms and like Overboard or something. So yeah, I was not really all that exposed to this era of Kurt Russell either. I also had no idea that John Carpenter directed the Elvis made-for-TV movie that he did. Which blew my mind.
There's a whole thing about like that era of like TV movies that were like actually big and like
it's probably after Roots. Roots probably legitimized it.
And like, and they, they talked about with this movie, they were going to shoot it in black and white. And then Universal was like, no, it has to be done for TV. Like that won't play on TV. So there's a whole thing too with Halloween. There's like a bunch of alternate cuts of or new scenes and stuff that had come out of Halloween, because when they got the TV rights to it, it was like TV rights, rebroadcast rights for movies were such a big thing that it would mandate you would have to like stretch the running time and like blah blah blah. So it's really interesting, like this era of
talk about that
filmmaking.
with Goonies too. I think there were a lot of like scenes that were added back in that had been cut for theatrical.
This era of filmmaking is like really informed by the TV rights stuff. Yeah, and no ladies.
Yeah,
not a single. No dames.
This movie failed the Bechdel test, but it's got a mustacheless Wilford Brimley. So
I just remember when people were rediscovering this movie during quarantine and passing around all the screen grabs of it, like nobody trusts anybody anymore, and we're all very tired. Or like the one where it's just that shot of Wilford Brimley in his shack with the noose, like, just conspicuously center frame next to him. Well, from the 22-year-old effects wunderkind that created the horrifying titular creature to the alcohol-besotted border town where they filmed, to the still raging debate over the film's end, here's everything you didn't know about John Carpenter's The Thing. Like a lot of his career, The Thing began with John Carpenter's obsession with iconic Western director Howard Hawks. This is a thing that if you read John Carpenter interviews or hear him talk at all, he's just obsessed with Howard Hawks, Rio Bravo. If you read about like the trope of the final girl, as like Laurie Strode in Halloween is like the final girl, he talks about how his women characters come from like Howard Hawks being like these very resourceful, courageous women in these situations. Assault on Precinct 13, he basically said was like his version of doing like a Hawksian Cowboys Under Siege movie. And Hawks had produced a 1950s version of the original source material of this. The original version is called The Thing from Another World.
Okay.
And the original novella is called Who Goes There, which is written by a guy named John W. Campbell Jr., who's writing under the pseudonym of Don Stewart. That film was directed by Christian Nyby and starred Gunsmoke's James Arness as the titular creature. And because it was the 50s, they didn't do the whole shape-shifting thing. They just put James Arness in some rubber. And it doesn't look particularly good. But he was also 6 feet 7 inches tall, so he was kind of a special effect in and of himself.
Cigar chopping executive. Just get him in some rubber. Yeah.
There is a great shot of it where like a door opens and you just see like all 80 inches of James Arness there just like silhouetted, and it's very dramatic looking. Carpenter said in the late 90s on a show called Movie Talk, he said, Howard Hawks was kind of the ultimate hero to me. And I saw his movies as a kid, but I wasn't familiar with some of the older ones and the scope of his work until I went to film school at USC. You don't really understand what he's doing when he does his technique and it works on you. You think you're just watching a movie and watching the actors, and in reality, you're watching a master at work. So for the 1982 movie, the producer of that, this guy named Stuart Cohen, who has a blog where he basically just runs down the entirety of the making of this movie. So that's where a lot of this comes from. There's a really great oral history over at Sci-Fi from September that I pulled a lot of this from as well. Cohen was a classmate of Carpenter's at USC and brought the film to Universal by way of a producer named David Foster in the late 1970s.
Not that producer named David Foster, I assume. Not the music producer.
Yeah, Catherine McPhee.
Yes.
No, I don't believe so. The first version of this was with Texas Chainsaw Massacre director Tobe Hooper and his co-writer on that film, a guy named Kim Heigl. They wanted to put it into development, but weren't sure about John, Stuart Cohen told Sci-Fi. He hadn't made Halloween at that point, and they wanted to keep their options open. And then in the interim, Halloween came out and became like the most profitable independent film of all time. Written quickly in order to avoid an impending writer's strike, what I remember of the script was an attempt at a man versus monster epic set at the bottom of the world, Stuart Cohen said on his blog. And he described their script as a sort of Antarctica Moby Dick with an Ahab-like character, I believe his name was the Captain, battling a large but decidedly non-shape-shifting creature.
Sounds like kind of great, honestly.
I would watch that movie, yes. He continued, seemingly written as a tone poem with a stab at a Southern Davis Grubb-like feel. I don't know what any of those words mean. The script was dense, humorless, almost impenetrable. The word John used for it when he later came on board was incomprehensible. Judged by all at the time to be something akin to a disaster, we agreed to part company. That's very mean, Mr. Cohen. They met with John Landis, a playwright named David Wiltsey, to write a draft. The guy who wrote Logan's Run, William F. Nolan, wrote a draft. None of these happened. So after 3 failed attempts to realize the thing, Universal was finally swayed in May of 1979 when Alien came out and became a huge, huge success. And Cohen went back to Carpenter, who said no again. He said, "You guys have failed 3 times. Why do I want to sign on to a failed project?" And he told John Carpenter told Sci-Fi, "It was not something I wanted to do. The original Thing was one of my favorite movies. I really didn't want to get near it. But I reread the novella, and I thought, this is a pretty good story here. We get the right writer, the right situation. We could do something with this." And so in Halloween, there's a point where their kids are watching TV, and there's The Thing from Another World is playing on the TV. So after Halloween, and then Escape from New York had also come out and been a big hit. And so Carpenter is suddenly like a name, and Universal is like, okay, like they're more amenable to having him on it. And this is also funny. he almost didn't come onto it because he was tapped to make this horror Western called El Diablo that I knew nothing about. And I guess it finally came out and was not good, but he was going to do that with EMI. So they started looking at other people. Stuart Cohen said they were going to have Walter Hill, who did The Warriors, and didn't he do 48 Hours?
I think so, yeah.
And even Sam Peckinpah was in talks, supposedly. And another reason that Carpenter wasn't interested in actually writing this was because he had just written and directed Halloween, the TV movie Somebody's Watching Me, The Fog, and Escape from New York within like 3 years. And then he had written the script for a movie about the Philadelphia Experiment, which is a famous urban legend hoax about like a naval destroyer that travels through time. Dude, have you heard about that?
I've heard about it. That's about all I know about it, though.
Yeah. I guess the movie came out and it was also bad. But John Carpenter had done a write on that and was tired of writing. That by the time that movie came out, the guy who directed it, Stuart Raffle, said it had been rewritten 9 times. So
The Philadelphia Experiment one?
Yeah, was not alone. John Carpenter said it had a great first 2 acts, but no third act. He called it a shaggy dog story that didn't end. So I struggled with it, but I couldn't fix it. I hit the wall, and I think it spooked me on writing for a little bit.
So instead, they hired the son of Golden Age Hollywood actor Burt Lancaster, Bill Lancaster. And he got a lot of flack from the horror and sci-fi community before and after the thing's release because his only credits up to that point were The Bad News Bears, the Walter Matthau naughty Little League coach baseball movie, and The Bad News Bears Goes to Japan, which I have to admit I was not aware existed, and I kind of really want.
Neither.
Did Matthau come back for that?
I hope so. Otherwise,
no. Tony Curtis in what I assume to be the naughty Little League coach role. Wow. Oh man, now I'm really curious about it. Huh. So yeah, the legacy of this Bill Lancaster guy, the screenwriter, is 2 Bad News Bears movies and The Thing. So that's wild. Bill Lancaster is talking to Starlog magazine in 1982 that he was first approached by producer Stuart Cohen for The Thing in 1977. And he admitted that he had no idea why he was the one who was approached. And he admitted that he hadn't read the novella at all at that point. And by 1979, 2 years later, when John Carpenter was attached, he'd finally read the source material, but told Starlog magazine that he, quote, didn't know who the heck John Carpenter was and hadn't seen Halloween. He continued, it's a very interior story and can get a little confusing. He's talking about the novella. There's very little action in it. It's mostly talk. Our problem was to try to turn it into physical action as well as verbal action and to clarify the weirdness of this monster as much as we could. Yeah, it's kind of hard to portray a monster whose whole shtick is that it's anything and everything. Mm-hmm. John Carpenter said in an interview with Creative Screenwriting, we met a lot of people on The Thing, and it was only when Bill Lancaster talked about what he could do with the short story that I thought, this is the guy. Bill was incredibly... I can't say this line without laughing. Bill was an incredibly charming person, and I loved his movie, The Bad News Bears. John Carpenter, who I'm not as familiar with him as you are, but I get the impression he hates everything, loves Bad News Bears. Although Bad News Bears is a grumpy movie, so I guess I can kind of see him enjoying that. It's a movie where adults are nasty to kids, so I can see John Carpenter enjoying that. John Carpenter continued, I thought Bill Lancaster was just brilliant, and that script for Bad News Bears was really, really good. He was the one who came up with a couple really key scenes in The Thing. And one of the challenges of adapting this novella to a screenplay was that there are 37 characters in the original novella, which is way too many characters. Bill Lancaster cut those to just 12, and he added the film's, as you write, literally explosive ending.
I forget everyone's names in this except for Childs because it's Keith David and McCready because it's a great name.
I know Palmer.
Yeah, I get Palmer and Windows confused. And
Windows is the radio guy.
But now the only reason I know Windows is we'll get into it later.
Yeah. Bill Lancaster was asked why he did not include any female characters in this movie, and he told Starlog, in reality, there aren't any women in these kinds of situations. Down in Antarctica. It seemed more honest to have a group of men in that situation. And in fact, the only women in the film, technically, other than there's a blow-up doll in it, is John Carpenter's then wife, Adrienne Barbeau, who starred in The Fog and Escape from New York, and she provides the voice of Kurt Russell's chess computer at the very beginning of the movie. Who
Cheating bitch.
Yeah, and then he pours his bottle of Jim Beam in the computer.
J&B. No, it's J&B.
J&B. Sorry, J&B.
Yeah.
Kurt Russell actually talked about this phenomenon of being on an all-male set in a 2013 screening. He said, "It was the most interesting set I was on because the psychology of what happened on that movie was unique. It's something I've never seen. Very little posturing goes on with men when there's no women around to posture for, and it seriously begins to show itself in the movie."
I just did a quick search that I didn't put in this before, but the history of women in Antarctic polar research. Marie Stopes, who is now famous as an early advocate for birth control, was also a highly accomplished paleobotanist in the early 20th century, and she requested to join Robert Scott's Terra Nova expedition, and he refused.
When was this?
Ernest,
like 1910?
That was 1910, 1913. Yes. Yeah.
Are you
very good.
You,
Very good Arctic pool there. Ernest Shackleton wrote of 3 sporty girls who begged to be included in his Antarctic expedition from 1914 to 1917. And apparently dozens of women requested to join expeditions by Australian explorer Douglas Mawson and American aviator Richard Byrd. And when a British Antarctic expedition was proposed in 1937, a newspaper reported that 1,300 women applied to join and all were denied.
Wow.
In most countries, women were formally excluded from Arctic research communities until the 20th century. So not just blowing smoke up everyone's ass. That was very much a thing. Women were not allowed in the Arctic.
So Bill Lancaster was right about that, but the reasons were bad. You know who's just telling me a lot about explorations in the South Pole? Actual friend of the pod, Allie. She in the same way that I love Titanic, she's really into this early South Pole exploration, and she was telling me a lot about it recently. So that's yeah, it's just funny that
Shout
came
out to
now.
Stoker Award-nominated horror author, friend of the pod, Allie Malinenko. But the biggest change Lancaster made to the story was changing its triumphant tone in which man defeats the aliens into a much more ambiguous one. The 1951, I didn't know this, the 1951 film ends with a character actually saying, "Keep watching the skies," which is, as far as I can tell, where that phrase comes from.
Oh, wow.
And that is that's like the classic Cold War paranoia line. Yeah, I looked that up as I was writing this because I was like, surely that can't actually be where that's from. Apparently it is. And he told Starlog Lancaster, there seem to be only 2 endings in these kinds of movies. Either the Twilight Zone type of twist or the destruction of the monster. What we have instead is like a tag. It's a nice comment of partial trust and partial mistrust, fear and a little bit of relief. I liked the ambiguity of it. I thought it would be interesting after all the violence to have this semi-nebulous little ending. I don't know, maybe people will hate it. It may not be commercial enough. Hold that thought. We'll get to that later. Bill wrote the first 30 or 40 pages and gave it to me, Carpenter continued. I read it and loved it. And then he struggled with the second act and the rest of the script. When he finished it, we went up to Northern California together for a weekend just to kind of hang out and talk it through. So we'll get to the human stars of this film out of the way now before we get to the actual stars. The wet puppets. Casting director Anita Dan deserves a lot of credit for the crew she and John put together at the Outpost. David Clennon, who plays Palmer, told The Village Voice in 2016. Richard Mazer, who played Clark, added, John's casting has a lot to do with people he has a good feeling about. He was never a big auditioner. In fact, Clennon and Mazer were both supposed to read for different parts, and then we're just like, can I do this guy instead? And Carpenter was like, exhales a cigarette. Whatever. Clennon taught himself to roll joints for the movie. Brought his own folding wooden weed pipe to the set. There's a great part. One of the things that he's reading is Chariots of the Gods. Do you know that book?
I do, yes. As a diehard alien enthusiast, that's very interesting to me. It's basically the text, I would say, for ancient aliens theories that aliens helped humanity along by giving us technology in ancient times. What do you think about that? Not to totally derail this episode.
I mean, I actually tend to think of being like a big
nihilist.
fan of Well, I was gonna say yes, but also a big fan of spores, molds, and other fungi. I tend to think that if there is life out there, it's like something horrifying and incomprehensible to us. Like
That makes sense. That
Like the
scans
thing-
with your take on the humanity.
yeah, I mean, like mushrooms and like all over the world like talk to each other. They like communicate and
That's why I
all
never
in
trust them.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no, I don't. I think if anything came down and gave us anything, it would be like the disease of consciousness or something. Like, I mean, that's what it's like psychedelic. There's like psychedelics authors that think like, the leaps in human consciousness came from psychedelics,
Oh, that's
which
interesting.
is either a blessing or a curse.
There's a book that was recommended to me by fellow iHeart producer Taylor Chicoine called The Illusion of Us, which basically posits that human beings were given just enough sentience by alien overlords to be able to efficiently mine this planet for various precious metals that were useful for building, I believe, spacecrafts.
that tracks.
And then they gave us just a little too much, and we started trying to think on our own. But
And then we created podcasts.
and now we just talk.
Stuart Cohen told Sci-Fi that Rob Bottin, who is the guy who did all the makeup and SFX, which we'll talk about him in a second, he wanted to play Palmer. He had been in The Fog. I guess that guy's like also like he's a very tall man. And so he's the lead ghost pirate in The Fog. And he was like, let me play Palmer. And they were like, you probably have enough on your plate, which he did. And this is funny. I guess Stuart Cohen was talking about like at the time, there was kind of standard practice in these studio movies to give these like idiot sort of third build characters in horror films and ensemble cast to like up and coming stand-up comics.
Oh,
So they auditioned Jay Leno for Palmer, as well as the guy who played Roger Rabbit, Charles Fleischer,
whoa.
and Gary Shandling. So if you subscribe to multiverse theory, as I often say, there's a universe somewhere in which a young Jay Leno got his big break by playing the stoner researcher in The Thing.
I have a much less interesting factoid about the guy who did end up playing the stoner researcher in The Thing, David
Go on.
Clennon. He appeared in Hal Ashby's Being There, the Peter Sellers movie, with the guy who played Copper in The Thing, Richard Dysart.
Okay.
Which is
I wonder
really
if
weird.
I wonder if they shared a producer or something.
Yeah, I thought I saw something about how there was some kind of Hal Ashby connection with John Carpenter. Yeah, I don't really have any follow-ups with that. I just thought it was weird.
Well, Tommy Waits, who plays the radio operator Windows, went a little too method. He decided that his character secretly harbored aspirations of making it in Hollywood, which he telegraphed by the mere fact of having this guy read just a Hollywood magazine in one scene. And then he went a step further by deciding that this character trait would manifest in having him wear sunglasses indoors. And then he went another step further and told Carpenter, I want everyone to call me Windows. That's my character's name now, is Windows. That was not the character's name in the script. He told Sci-Fi, I went up to John on the break. I said, John, from now on, I want everyone to call me Windows. And then the most John Carpenter action description of all time. He looked down at the floor, he looked up at the ceiling and took a long drag on the cigarette and put the cigarette out. You could see him thinking it through and he went, all right, everyone, from now on, Tommy wants everyone to call him Windows, okay? And then according to Stuart Cohen, everyone hated the name Windows outside of Waits and Carpenter. The rest of the cast thought he was being a weird prima donna, trying to get this character all this method background, Meisner actors studio bullshit.
I think it's a cool fitting name because he's a radio operator. He's their window into the outside world.
Did you also study at the actors studio? Are you an Adler guy, Jordan?
I had a lot of
Is that
Adler
your-
friends. Yes, I did.
Talk
And-
about
and
controlling your
Atlantic.
instrument. The runner-up for that part was Brad Dourif, who would go on to voice Chucky in the Child's Play
Oh, wow.
franchise. Yeah. You an Alexander Technique guy? I bet you are, you son of a bitch.
I went to an Alexander Technique class on the advice of my girlfriend, and they put you on the table and they basically just try to at some point
Relax you.
and
they were like, "You're made of tension."
The woman had to go and get her supervisor to which somehow made me more tense.
She's like, "I've never seen anything like this."
She was, in my opinion, fairly rude about it, and I didn't go back.
That is so funny to me. They're like calling in other specialists. They're like, "You got to see this guy. He doesn't have a relaxed part of his entire body.
He's made of
defies
wood."
medical science."
Well, we were talking before we started recording that my chest literally hurts right now from somehow sleeping incorrectly, and I don't know why. I was tense. I was so tense when I slept that I somehow did something to my sternum.
I was going to suggest Alexander Technique to you, but apparently you're on a do not call list for them.
I'm blacklisted. Yeah. So this ensemble cast, which was actually a first for John Carpenter, went through 2 weeks of rehearsals before shooting, which sort of helped their chemistry, but it may have also contributed to their irritability with each other. David Clennon, the guy who played Palmer, said, "We wasted hours and hours of rehearsal time discussing metaphysics. Some of the actors were obsessed with this question: when did you become the thing? When did the alien take over your mind and body? Do you know that you've become the thing? Or do you just go on thinking that you're your old self?" That's a horrifying question. David Clennon, on the other hand, quote, "couldn't see the point in solving this silly riddle." John Carpenter, meanwhile, deeply regretted having these rehearsals. Another actor, Richard Masner, said, "John said a couple of times that the worst mistake he made was having these rehearsals. It's a process that John never repeated."
Someone else said in the documentary that it was the actors took too much power from him by having these rehearsals.
The actor who played the biologist Fuchs in the movie, Joel Paulus, said, "We really established relationships with each other, and I think that comes through in the film. When we finished filming the film, John famously said, 'I'll never rehearse actors again.'" And this was the first movie for one of your favorite actors in this, Keith David, who plays Childs. And he'd go on to act in John Carpenter's They Live opposite professional wrestler Rowdy Roddy Piper.
The film in which one of the best fight scenes of all time, the alley fight that is recreated in full in that episode of South Park. I think I've sent you that before because it's the movie
I've
with
seen, you mean the South Park clip? I've seen him.
Yeah, no, but the actual alley fight is just them like sweating and just like big beefy men. It's just so funny because it's like, nowadays in like action movies, like everyone has to know like Krav Maga and everything is like all these actors are just like super good at blocking and hand-to-hand combat and stuff. And this is just two big beefy dudes sweating and out of breath in a trash strewn alleyway, like just swearing and kicking each other in the groin. It's a triumph. It's like a Busby Berkeley film.
Prior to appearing in The Thing, Keith David, who played Childs, he had been a speech therapist, and so he spent 6 or 7 weeks before shooting The Thing doing speech training. And then he got into a car accident the night before shooting began and broke his hand. And he told the Village Voice, "By the time I had to be at work in the morning, my hand had swollen up to the size of a boxing glove. I could see John Carpenter and producer Larry Franco on the set, so I tried to hide my hand behind my back because he didn't want to be recast. But I couldn't function because it hurt so bad. So as I walked slowly towards them, I let my hand drop to my side. Their eyes grew to the size of saucers when they saw my hand. 'What happened to you?' They immediately sent me to the hospital where they put 2 pins in my hand. I was able to start shooting in the next couple days, but there was still a bit of swelling. So I put on a surgical glove to cover my stitches, and they put on a black glove over it that was painted to match my skin. You'll note that you never see my left hand in the first part of the movie." God. Keith David also added that he was scared of operating the film's extremely awesome flamethrower. He said, everybody always thinks it's so sexy and exciting, but it was scary. This is him talking to Sci-Fi. It wasn't napalm. It was real gasoline coming through a real pump and a real gun and real fire. A slip of the finger could cost somebody their life or certainly lots and lots of damage. Other people that were considered to play the part of Childs were Isaac Hayes.
Yeah.
I didn't realize he was in Escape from New York. Oh, my God. Carl Weathers, can totally see that. And Ernie Hudson, who'd go on to co-star in Ghostbusters.
I thought there were going to be a lot more flamethrowers in my life when I was a kid. There's one in Alien too, right? Is there flamethrower? Oh, yeah. In the second one, she has the flamethrower. Yeah, man. I thought I was going to have a lot more flamethrowers.
I mean, living in California really didn't help with that.
No, it didn't. No. Kurt Russell, who plays the film's begrudging hero, MacReady, starred in 2 of Carpenter's last 3 pictures at this point. It was the aforementioned TV movie Elvis in 1979 and 1981's Escape from New York, when he's just doing Clint Eastwood with great hair. God,
he
that
has
Snake
great hair.
Plissken hair looks like a beautiful wig. I don't give a about your war or your president. He's so good in it. Jeff Bridges, who would go on to star in Starman by Carpenter, was also considered for MacReady. Christopher Walken, can you imagine that? I think he would be in, when did Dead Zone come out? He was in Dead Zone around this time. Nick Nolte would have been a good MacReady. He wouldn't even had to he would have brought his own scotch to the set. Chris Christopherson, that would have whipped.
Oh, yeah.
Sam Shepard, they were all unavailable or unwilling. Other meetings were held with Tom Berenger, Ed Harris, Scott Glenn, Tom Atkins, another Carpenter 80s horror icon. He's in The Fog. He's also in Escape from New York. He's the star of Halloween 3. But funnily enough, Australian actor Jack Thompson, who had just won a Best Actor statue at Cannes for Breaker Morant. Do you know that film? I don't know. Nope. He came closest. He flew in to read for Carpenter personally, and they had decided to go with Russell. And Russell had, I love this so much. Kurt Russell and John Carpenter are like buds. And I guess before he was even cast in this movie, he had been hanging out with John Carpenter and like kicking ideas around for it and working on the movie with him. And they are on completely opposite sides of the political spectrum. John Carpenter is like a committed ex-hippie leftist, smokes a ton of weed, and he has repeatedly said that Kurt Russell is to the right of Attila the Hun. But he wasn't actually brought on, the ink wasn't dry in his deal until they were about to do second unit stuff in Alaska. And it took him a year to grow that beard. Fun
shows.
Fact. And one day while he was, after shooting a scene with the flamethrower, he pranked Carpenter by showing up the next day with his face and head completely covered in bandages. which can you imagine? Your star shows up and he's like, John. Because they had to take a bus. They had to drive like a bus an hour and a half from where they were staying to get up to the shooting thing. And I guess sometimes Carpenter would already be there because he wasn't staying the same place with the rest of them. So imagine Kurt Russell coming down off this bus, completely swaddled in bandages the day after shooting with a flamethrower. Kurt Russell was our captain. Peter Maloney, who played the meteorologist Bennings, told Sci-Fi, he was hilarious and with us all the time. There was no separation of him and us the way that there is sometimes with the star of a movie and the rest of the cast. Tommy Windows Waits explained that Russell got in a bit of real-life heroics before the film even started shooting. Much of this was shot in Stewart, British Columbia, in Canada near the Alaskan border, and during the nearly 6-hour bus trip to the location the first time, a whiteout hit, which is a very severe snowstorm hit, and the bus the cast was traveling in nearly skidded off the road. And when Tommy said, Kurt goes, okay, nobody move. Who's in the seat farthest from the door? I said, I am. He goes, all right, Tommy, get on your hands and knees and crawl to the front. Slowly I did it, and I got off the bus. One at a time, he got us all off the bus. Then the weight shifted, and we got behind the bus and pushed it back on the road and drove on safely. This was before cell phones. There were no radios, no communications. We arrived at 5:30 a.m. as the sun was coming up, and there was John Carpenter at the bus stop, waiting for his men, presumably chain smoking.
Presumably pissed.
Yeah. As you meditate on that, we'll be right back with more Too Much Information after these messages.
Now you've arrived at the Wilford Brimley corner of this podcast. He plays the character Blair, a role that was originally considered for Halloween regular Donald Pleasance, who's better known to me as Blofeld in You Only Live Twice. I think that was the only Bond movie he was in.
And Loomis in Halloween.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, oh God. Evil has come to your little town, Sheriff.
He is one spooky dude.
Oh, he is. Yeah. And he was just drunk all the time. Danielle Harris, who's the she's in 4 and 5, I think. She said at one point, "It was a long time before I learned that what Donald had in his hip flask wasn't actually medicine, and that's why he smelled the way that he did." But he was very sweet with her, apparently, which is just funny because when you watch that 4th Halloween movie, he's like shaking her, and he's like, "Yeah!" like just screaming at the top of his lungs at this like 5-year-old child.
I feel like he would have tipped the movie. I can't imagine Donald Pleasance in The Thing.
He would have been chewing. They would have been pulling chunks of the scenery out from his teeth in between takes. I mean, he's not a subtle man.
No. So they went with Wilford Brimley, who takes subtlety to the level of a martial art, I would say. Actor Richard Masur has a great line about Brimley that he said to the Village Voice. "One day we were sitting around talking about an upcoming scene, and Wilford Brimley is just sitting there chuckling. I said, 'What?' And he said, 'You guys still don't get it. This movie isn't about us. It's about the rubber guy.'" The wet puppets, if you will.
Yes.
Brimley himself told the Village Voice, "I didn't go to the premiere of The Thing. I didn't see it in a theater. I finally saw the movie in my home, and I thought it was really good." Apparently, this was about 25 years after Brimley said the film, quote, stunk in Starlog in 1989.
Yeah, I wasn't able to find that one. The Starlog, like 130 issues of Starlog are on archive.org. So, fun tip for you sci-fi dorks out there. You can go and read really good quality scans of almost all of Starlog, but not that one, which killed me because I really wanted to read Wilford Brimley talking about The Thing and also Cocoon.
Did he like Cocoon?
I think he did. I think he liked, but
I didn't. I thought it stunk.
You, Wilford Brimley.
After filming the opening of the film in a Juneau ice field, more, as you called it, civilized shooting began on the Universal backlot. Director of photography Dean Cundy, your personal hero.
My boy!
Yeah, told Starlog magazine, "One of our first thoughts was to build the sets inside a big ice house, but we couldn't find one big enough. Then we decided to refrigerate the stages on the Universal lot. We had a couple of experts figure out the humidity to temperature ratios, and we brought in as many huge portable air conditioners as the studio had. We sealed off the stages and built huge humidifiers and misters to add moisture to the air. And I guess this was to create the effect of a frozen tundra."
Mm-hmm.
The aforementioned freezing, icy tundra wasn't really a problem for the actors on the sets because they were in wardrobe, but it was nearly 100 degrees outside, and going in and out of the cold set in the hot exterior meant that all the actors in this environment got sick.
Yeah, it's as anyone will tell you, it's not being in one temperature for too long, it's the constant extremes.
Yeah. Producer Stuart Cohen told Sci-Fi, "The first day I got sick. It was 37 degrees inside and 106 outside. The crew inside, wearing parkas all day, was okay. I was going in and out, throwing my jacket off and then throwing it back, and I came down with the flu by the end of the first day. I was not the only one, though. The crew ended up trading colds and flu back and forth ever since day one." Probably my favorite anecdote from this entire making of occurred on the Universal backlot when the production attempted to build what became known by one crew member as the $40,000 mistake. And this is basically an artificial version of the Arctic wilderness. There were sheets of muslin, 100-pound bags of gypsum and fiberglass rocks, along with about 3.5 weeks of work went into the creation of this faux Arctic wilderness, which was then used for 3 half-scale remote control helicopters in a shot. But one of these remote control helicopters bumped into a rock and crashed. The second exploded by accident, and the third didn't fly correctly. And one crew member told Sci-Fi, "Stuart Cohen does not like to relate that story."
Yeah, you know, it was a good shoot when someone just has a whole anecdote called the $40,000 mistake. So as we mentioned, the exteriors were shot in British Columbia, and to get to where they built this on top of a glacier, where they built the research outpost set, cast and crew had to take a bus an hour and a half each day to get from the town where they were staying, Stewart, up to the set. John Carpenter said, "I stayed in a nice old hotel in Stewart, but the crew had to stay on a harbor barge. Luckily, I didn't have to put up with that." This is for the Village Voice. Richard Mazer said, the crew stayed on the Portland Canal, which is the longest fjord in North America. Stewart has the highest snowfall in all of North America, like 96 feet of snow on average. And at the end of this canal were a couple of big residential barges that had 30 rooms apiece and were typically used for mining crews. But we were there in December, so the hunters and miners had cleared out for the winter. We were the idiots who came up to shoot a movie. It was 20 degrees below zero there. And the shoot, obviously, was totally dependent on the weather. Carpenter continued to the Village Voice. "We lost a lot of time because we would get whiteouts that we couldn't shoot in. Sometimes we couldn't even leave the base camp." He continued to Sci-Fi. "We were all in it together. It was not an easy film to make. We had to fight the elements. It was rough. And since we were all in it together, we all bonded. Everybody bonded." Do you remember the episode? Were you an X-Files guy?
Surprisingly, no. No, I never really.
There's I went back and watched all of the Monster of the Week episodes because I have no patience for the larger conspiracy theory, like the longer. I just want the ones that have like the good wet puppets and guys in rubber suits. And there's one that is very obviously just a thing rip. It's called Ice, and the homage went so far that they reused exterior shots from the thing in this X-Files episode. Another element of bonding, alcohol. There's a town in Alaska 2 miles from Stewart called Hyder, which at the time had a permanent population of 15 people and 7 bars. This was because alcohol in Canada was more expensive and more regulated than the U.S., so fishermen, hunters, and miners in Stewart would walk the 2 miles in 20 degree below weather to Hyder to get drunk. Richard Mazer told The Voice about a ritual that the cast went through called Hyderizing, which took place at a bar in town called the Hyder Inn. We get to the Hyder Inn. We're the only 2 people there. Kurt Russell says to the bartender, "My friend here needs to get Hyderized." The guy brings this little 4-ounce juice glass, and he fills it with white liquid. You have to blow it back in one shot and then turn it over on the bar. Then the bartender rubs the glass around on the bar, picks up the glass, and lights it on fire. The glass explodes instantly because it was full of pure grain alcohol. Your head explodes after the booze hits your stomach. You're face drunk almost immediately, especially if you've been working all day and haven't eaten in several hours. Did you find a Yelp for the Hyder Inn?
I'm on TripAdvisor, and they have a speech bubble on the wall for photo ops that says, "I've been Hyderized."
That's amazing.
Yeah.
The other thing about it is that they were drinking all this Everclear and stuff because I remember John Carpenter. There was a quote in here that I didn't put in where he was upset that they couldn't get beer because it freezes, right?
Yeah.
So the only alcohol was hard liquor.
Keith David, who played Childs, told The Voice, "If I don't drink today, it's because I drank enough then." And Waits, who played Windows, is now a recovering alcoholic, told Sci-Fi, "That became a hazing or a ritual that we put ourselves through. We did a lot of drinking and a lot of partying. It was burning the candle at both ends, staying up all night and having to shoot all day. It was the 80s, man. It was a different time." And the locals were an eccentric bunch. On the film's DVD commentary, John Carpenter recalls that the pilot they used for shooting in Alaska offered to crash his helicopter for money.
I'll take it down if you want an extra $50. Tommy Waits is not Tom Waits, but Tommy Waits, who played Windows. He was a member of the Actors Studio.
Oh, okay. So that makes sense.
The method guy. Yeah. He was in a Mammoth play. He was in American Buffalo, and that's when Kurt Russell and John Carpenter saw him.
Oh, wow.
Supposedly.
Still think it's a good name.
He actually met Tom Waits, and that's when he decided to start going by Tom G. Waits to differentiate himself.
I can't tell if you're putting me on.
I'm not. I'm reading this guy's
really?
Wikipedia right now because he was also in the Warriors. When I just Googled him, I was like, oh, yeah, he's one of the Warriors. I completely forgot about that. because everybody in the Warriors has like dark hair and looks the same in those vests. But yeah, this guy was sorry, just going down this guy. You got stuff to do. I'm sorry.
No, I don't.
My boy Dean Cundy.
Yes.
I love Dean Cundy. I love Panavision. I love anamorphic lenses. I love wide shot compositions. Dean Cundy was one of the first guys who I actually like saw as like I was like, oh, I like cinematography. It's interesting to me. It's like him and Roger Deakins and Luj Beshki. He's not the guy who does all of Iñárritu stuff.
Yeah.
Who shot all of Revenant in like natural light. Do you ever read about that?
I remember it was like him and like I remember reading about that after reading about like Barry Lyndon, because didn't Kubrick do all Barry Lyndon with natural lighting or most of it?
Yeah. And then who did Hateful Eight, where they had to go and actually find like they found like antique ultra Panavisions. They shot it in 70 millimeters, so they found like literal old antique Panavision 70 millimeters to shoot that, and they made 90% of that movie in a one room cabin.
What episode did Dean Cundy come up in? Because I remember like we've talked about him on here, and you've talked.
Was
about
it Jurassic Park? I know we
didn't do an episode of Jurassic Park. I'm trying to remember.
Honey, We Shrunk the Kids.
No.
I know, I did bring him up at some point. He worked closely with Rob Bottin to figure out the best angles and lighting to shoot all the stuff. He says Rob was very sensitive about his creations because he didn't want them to look fake. So he was like, I have suggestions about the angles and stuff. But one of the ideas that they had, they wanted to change the speed of the camera during those sequences. Cundy was talking to American Cinematographer magazine. He said, I wanted to vary the camera speed during the transformations because Rob and I thought they might be more interesting if we didn't shoot them at regular speed. We went through a couple of iterations trying to vary the speed from very fast motion to slow motion all in one shot. And of course, the technical challenge was that as you vary the frame rate, the exposure changes. As you increase the speed to slow the image down, everything gets darker because the negative is seeing less light. We worked with Panavision and a couple other companies to try and develop a camera that would automatically adjust the exposure, and we got kind of close, but we never succeeded. Now, of course, it's all computer controlled stuff. Another thing that they worked with Panavision on, this is him talking to Sci-Fi Now, was that they replaced the usual lubricant that they used in these cameras with an anti-freezing agent because they were shooting in these temperatures. And he said that we also had a warming system mounted for the film magazine on top of the camera that held all the film to keep the film from freezing and cracking and buckling. But they couldn't get too warm because then if you brought the cameras inside during breaks, the lenses would fog up because of the condensation, because of the temperature shifts, and you'd have to take them apart. And he said, pretty quickly, we decided that the room with the camera work always had to stay the same temperature as outside, which was below freezing. So the camera assistants never got a break to go into the warmth while they were working. They would go into the below freezing camera room and work in their big parkas and gloves and everything. Cundy started in pre-production with this. He started when they were basically in the storyboarding phase. He said, he's talking to Starlog in 1982. He said, I suggested putting ceilings on all the sets and bringing the pipes into the frame line to increase the sense of claustrophobia. We lit whole scenes with just the flares the actors carried around.
Wow.
Yeah, can you imagine that? And he's one of the people who wanted to shoot it in black and white earlier. And so when the studio balked at that, he said, well, we'll just desaturate everything. And so he said, we ended up using color very selectively, with the Thing being the most colorful object in the entire movie. We painted the inside of the station in shades of gray. Testing the paint colors to get one that was the most neutral. We repainted props gray, and even the wardrobe was coordinated to be in somber colors of dark blue, gray, and brown. Whatever we wanted to give color to a sequence, I did it with lights. So that's when you get the flares and fire and everything. And because they're shooting in anamorphic and these Panavision lenses, you get that really beautiful lens flare and everything, which is, of course, how... now it's become a punchline because guys like J.J. Abrams, when they were shooting Star Trek, was just like inserting digital lens flare and everything because they were not shooting with where you get natural lens flare from the lenses. But no, he was like, no, we'll just do it in post.
I have a question for you, and the answer might just be because it looks cool. Why did all the characters in the movie, when they went out into the the snow and the winds carry these flares for light as opposed to, I don't know, flashlights.
Flashlights?
Yeah.
Because it looked cool.
Okay. That's what I figured. I wasn't sure if something about how like flashlights didn't work. If the batteries
those are real
would freeze
flares
or what.
That might be it. That might be it. But those were real flares. On the DVD commentary, they talk about burning themselves on it all the
That's
time.
what I was
and
thinking when I was watching that.
And doing when he's doing the scene, McCready, when Kurt Russell's doing the scene when he comes back in and he's holding the flare up to the dynamite, he talked about having to rush through that monologue so he wouldn't burn his hands on it, having to time it out to the length that he had in the flare. Another shout out to the wolf dog actor Jed, who is simply an incredible screen presence in this film. That dog hit his marks like a f***ing champ.
Is he the one that tears himself into four?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, he is. He went on to star in both of the White Fang movies.
Oh wow.
Yeah. And the hallway walk that he does took only 4 or 5 takes, which is
better than most actors.
I was going to say, yeah. Richard Mazer told the Village Voice, during the rehearsal period, dog trainer Clint Rowe brought Jed the wolf dog in to get him used to the sound and smell of people. He was a young dog, so he was very jumpy. Same, buddy. I
need to get used to the sound and smell of people too.
Yeah. I worked with Jed and Clint for an hour on the first day of rehearsals and every day after that. It worked out very well during shooting, too. Jed would come and stand next to me, and he wouldn't do that thing that dogs do where they look back at the handlers. If you watch the scenes between us, he's never looking at my hand for a treat. He's just there with me. He's making his own choices. That's what makes his performance so spooky. He talks about in the documentary, The Thing Takes Shape, about how because he was part wolf, the dog wouldn't like whimper or like bark or cry. He wasn't as vocal. And so he was like, the trainer, this guy, Clint Rowe, is like, yeah, so, you just got to watch out for when he stares a certain way, because that means he's getting upset. So they
also Sam.
Yeah. Peter Maloney, who plays Bennings, needed extra time with Jed because he was afraid of dogs, and Jed was enormous. He said, when Jed stood up and put his paws on my shoulder to lick my face, he was taller than me. I was pretty freaked out by having him do that.
Is Bennings the dog handler in the movie?
No, that's I think that's Richard Mazer. Bennings is the guy who runs out in the snow with the big finger gloves and then looks at the camera and does the like.
Oh yeah.
Once again, they're all just guys in parkas. I was hoping for more interesting stuff about how they got those sounds. It's just like they just pitch like very speed at a bunch of stuff to get those sounds. So some of the transformations and visual effects were included into the script. Bill Lancaster told Starlog, basically I just wrote with no holds barred. And then other scenes he kind of left vague and fleshed out once the effects team got on. Rob Bottin was doing the makeup effects. A guy named Roy Arbogast was doing all the mechanical armatures and animatronic stuff. And an artist named Michael Plug, who is a comic book artist, had done all the storyboards. And they all sat together and basically decided what was feasible. Lancaster told Starlog, we'd put our ideas together and they'd be there for different departments to see. Some of the effects were just too difficult. Sometimes I'd come up with an idea and they'd say, screw the writer, he's nuts. How can we do this? But occasionally they'd suggest something and I'd say, how the hell do you think you can do that? They'd say, watch us. And then they'd do it. So that's when we come to Rob Bottin, whose name I don't know why it's pronounced like that. It's spelled Botten, but everyone calls it Bottin, so sure. That kid was, I think, 21 or 22 when he started working on this. And he had like 35 or 40 people working on this film with him. The film was budgeted at 10 mil, and he was given $1.5 million out of it, which was like, I think at the time, the largest budget that had been given to a makeup department on this. And it's like I mentioned at the intro, it's like this and American Werewolf in London. And actually, Rob Bottin, when he was 14, sent the guy who did the American Werewolf in London effects, Rick Baker. He sent that dude just a drawing because he was trying to get Rick Baker's autograph. And Rick Baker was so impressed by what he had sent him that he was like, come apprentice for me. And so he did work on the 76 version of King Kong. He did work on Star Wars. Rob Bottin is actually the tallest member of the Cantina Band in Star Wars. I think he's the guy, like the one playing the thing that looks like a clarinet. And then he did The Howling, which is Joe Dante, who did Gremlins. That is Joe Dante's werewolf movie. And so the two werewolf transformation scenes in 80s horror are generally thought of as The Howling and then American Werewolf in London. And it was Rick Baker and his protege. And that's what I love about this era. Like, all these guys were really tight with each other because there weren't that many people doing this stuff. And so they would just, when these movies came out or they heard about different people who were working on it, they would just immediately be like, oh, did you see that? We have to beat him now. Probably the other biggest one is The Fly. And that was a guy named Chris Walas who, they were just like, well, how do we beat the other guy who did this? Rob Bottin would also go on to design the RoboCop suit. Which is an incredible feat of sculpting. He did the gross robot back of Peter Weller's head in that. And he won an Academy Award in 1991 for his work on Total Recall. So another famous gif around the internet is when Arnold's eyes are popping out in the Martian atmosphere. That was Bottin. And he also did the gross puppet that comes out of the guy's torso. Just really incredible stuff. Sadly, he seems to have completely left this industry. Like, he does not. He's like he's such a gregarious, like, funny, warm guy in the interviews that he's done, but he's like a total recluse now. I mean, the last credit that he did was in his last interview was in 2008, and the last work that he did was apparently in 2014 in an episode of Game of Thrones, and that was like uncredited. So people just like don't know what he's doing now, but man, what a body of work to go out on. Funnily enough, he was not production's first choice. There was a concept artist and model maker named Dale Kuipers. I don't know how you pronounce that guy's name. He was hired to work on the thing, and you can see the stuff that he drew out there. But he was involved in a very serious accident months into pre-production, and Carpenter hired Bottin because he had done and acted in the makeup for the fog zombies, the ghosts, the seamen, the sailor ghosts, the sailor ghosts in the fog. Bottin told Fangoria, Dale had some absolutely beautiful paintings of what he thought the monster should look like. This is to Fangoria. Fangoria and Starlog, I think, were the same publisher. Fangoria was the horror side of things, and Starlog was more sci-fi. I don't think the Fango archives... Oh, no, they are. The Fango archives are also online. John wasn't too enthusiastic about what I had in mind for the thing at first. He said it was too weird.
Serious question. I wonder if James Cameron was ever considered for this, because models were sort of how he got his start.
It's funny you mentioned that, because the guy who did...
James Cameron crops up later on in passing.
Well, Cameron would have been working for...
Roger Corman, right?
Yes. Oh, yeah. So the guy who does the title sequence to this,
right.
Apparently, the other guy he was up against was Roger Corman's New World Pictures, where a young James Cameron was working. My God, can you imagine Jim Cameron in a friggin' Arctic outpost?
I mean, sort of.
Yeah, I mean, I can. He would have been an outrageous asshole. Would have been terrible. Although maybe he wasn't quite up his own butt at that point, considering he was making Piranha 2 for Roger Corman.
I sent you that lengthy YouTube clip of him discussing his like LSD trip in the 80s, right?
Yeah. The first and only time he experienced ego death. It was a dream come true, Bottin told Fangoria, of the massive budget and team he was given for this. But he did say, I found it difficult to work with so many people, all with different needs and wants. There was an FX line producer named Eric Jensen who he had worked on with The Howling, who basically was kind of the... Can I say straw boss?
Sure.
Is that yeah. That has racist connotations, though, right? Line boss? Well, he credits Eric Jensen with helping keep everyone in line. Stuart Cohen told Sci-Fi, Rob was the smartest person on the production. Whip smart. His organizational abilities left something to be desired, but he was a genius. John Carpenter told The Village Voice, "There was no average working day with Rob. Sometimes he took forever, but sometimes he was really quick. Mostly he took forever. That was really rough. There was a lot of setup time, which mainly involved discussions about lighting. Rob would want the lighting to be darker, and Dean Cundey would want the lighting to be brighter. At one point, Rob said, maybe it's not a good idea to use this blood. Maybe we ought to use a different color." He was thinking about the MPAAA, so we toned that down a bit. And the aforementioned dog effect that horrified a young Jordan Runtagh so much was done by Stan Winston, who would later on do Aliens with Jim Cameron, The Terminators. He did the first 2 Predators. He did the first 3 Jurassic Parks.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Winston is like another guy on the Mount Rushmore of practical effects. Yeah. He's incredible. And he did the gross dog thing because Rob Bottin had just done The Howling, and he said, I got to the point where I was thinking, if I have to do another stinking mechanical dog, I'll go nuts. So I asked John if we could use Stan. He said yes. I told Stan what I had in mind and just let him go. I didn't even go over to his shop. I told him to call me when it was done, and when I saw it, I was blown away. That set piece was so convincing that it caught the attention of the Humane Society, who thought the crew was, quote, doing terrible things to real dogs. The guy who did publicity on this, named Craig Miller, he told Sci-Fi, we had to bring them in and show them the mechanisms so that they would get it that it wasn't real. We don't have to go over every scene in the film, but there are 2 that are really amazing. Probably, just the show-stopping piece when they do the defibrillator test, that just everything goes haywire. It has one of my favorite reaction shots in all of cinema, which is just the guy looking as the head sprouts legs and walks away. The guy just goes, "You gotta be kidding me." That is they did that when the scene in which that thing chomps his arms off. They found a guy who had lost both arms in an industrial accident, which I guess if you're doing gore effects for movies, you have those guys in your Rolodex.
Why is that necessary though? I like, as opposed to just like having your arm, like,
I guess if you want a full body shot with no cutaways, if you want to do all this stuff in one take, and this gets back to the kind of like trying to outdo each other, they would just try and do as much of this stuff in like single takes and with as few cutaways as possible. And so to get this scene where the guy plunges defibrillators into this, what turns out to be the thing, and his stomach opens and chomps this guy, they found a guy who did not have his arms from the forearms down, and outfitted him with both a ghoulish prosthetic mask of the actor he was supposed to be portraying, and fake arms made out of wax, bones, jello, and latex rubber, which were then crushed for real by a set of hydraulically operated mechanical jaws. So yeah, I guess they didn't want the guy's real arms in there.
I was thinking of like strapping your arms to your sides and having like a shirt with fake arms out of your, coming out of your sleeves.
I think it was so that when he pulled away and kind of like reeled back and had his like arms spouting goo, they were like, well, it needs to be, we need to have those in there. But, doing the setup for this stuff took hours. And so the guy who plays Norris is like strapped to the table with just his head sticking out, and then a whole sculpted fake body, which they said he had to, they basically had to map out his chest hair to make it realistic, make a realistic double this. They had him strapped to this table, and they do the whole thing when it opens and all the tentacles come out of his torso, and it's making all the horrible noises, and there's goo shooting everywhere. The first time they shot it, Rob Bottin said it looked like a Vegas fountain. Like it looked like the fountain in front of the Bellagio or whatever. And it just looked so like, he said it looked like there should have been showgirls dancing next to it. And they did it, and John Carpenter's like, cut. This looks like crap. We got to do it again. And Rob Bottin's like, really? He's like, yeah, it didn't look good. And it was like, that took us like 8 hours to set up. And so the guy's like still under this table with his head sticking through. And he's like, wait, really? We have to go again? He's like, yeah, we got to go again. Took hours. But they got it in the second take. And there's the other effect in that scene when they when the head starts to stretch off and like melts, falls off the table. They got the stretching effect by just doing like there's like crazy glue and rubber cement and all this stuff in there, and it was giving off so many fumes that they had this thing called a fire grill, which is like a length of metal tubing that has gas going through it, so that you can it looks like it's like a barbecue grill apparatus, and so it's so you can get a line of flames wherever you want in the camera's POV. So they have this thing just under the camera's depth of field to kind of put flames up, and it actually ignited all of the fumes that were floating around in this closed tiny set at this time, and lit the prop on fire. And there's an amazing Rob Bottin tells this story.
And I'm staring down at the body, and I'm in shock because since it's a one-take deal only, I look down at it and I go, oh my God, it's on fire, right? It's on fire. And then John says, don't just stand there, put it out, you idiot. You know, like that. And then, you know, I was just so shocked that months of work preparing for this moment was just blown to bits in just a second. So we, you know, put it out with fire extinguishers and stuff like that. And then he just goes, oh my God. We had to set up, take a whole nother day to get back to this point, and finally just accomplish the one shot where the head stretches and the next set.
He talks about, he said for months afterwards, John would just look over at him and start going, oh my God, it's on fire. Fuck with him. And that's what I mean. I really hope Rob Bottin's okay, man, because he's such a delight in that documentary. Oh my God, it's on fire. Unfortunately, all of this came at a high physical, mental, and emotional cost. And by the time they get to that closing scene, Stuart Cohen says, we were just running out of money. Rob's shop was like a boulder rolling downhill, picking up labor costs. John had to go hat in hand to Universal for the last $100,000 to make the monster. Otherwise, there wasn't going to be one. And part of this was because they tried to do that whole end confrontation with like Ray Harryhausen level stop motion animation, which you can see like one or two shots of it in the final film. It's when the tentacle comes out and grabs the dynamite plunger, and it does look glaringly fake. But they built a whole miniature. They built a whole like, you know, whatever 1/10 scale of that underground set. They did it all with stop motion. And then they saw the dailies, and John Carpenter was like, scrap it. So they built a 300 pounds worth of rubber over this giant frame of mechanisms and urethane and fiberglass components, and it took 40 people to operate that thing. There's a team member in it with the incredible name of Vaughn Babison, who is actually the guy who used the term the $40,000 mistake earlier. He told Sci-Fi, we were all just crammed underneath this. It was built on a stanchion that was 6 feet off the ground. And they were just madly 40
like the
people.
Muppet from hell.
Yeah, exactly. Just like wheeling it into the shot, and rods and puppets and all this crap. So as we mentioned earlier, the flares were real. It has constantly been, I read this on IMDb and stuff, that they were like, they used real dynamite to shoot this. They did not. That would not have been a thing. But there is a shot in the movie where they did not know how much of an explosion that they had basically built into it. So when Kurt Russell throws the dynamite and it explodes, that is his genuine reaction. He had no idea how big this explosion was actually going to take. And poor sweet Rob Bottin.
Yeah, after working up to 18 hours a day, 7 days a week, sleeping on the set, he was hospitalized for 2 weeks with exhaustion, double pneumonia, and a bleeding ulcer during the production. He recalled during the making of documentary, John looked at me and said, you don't look well. Somebody take this guy to the hospital.
and for John, 40 cigarettes a day, Carpenter, to look at you and say, you
Fair.
don't look well. You look like crap. There's John Carpenter's constantly repeated quote about having to make, in Halloween 2, when they make Laurie, Michael's sister, he like hated that it's like his least favorite thing that he's ever written. He talks about having just written that under a very strict studio timetable, just drunk. He's like, I would sit down and with a 6-pack of Budweiser and just bang out pages every night.
We're going to take a quick break. But we'll be right back with more Too Much Information in just a moment.
The ending of The Thing, or as I subtitled it, All Things Must Pass. The ending of The Thing with my favorite scene, so relentlessly downbeat. McCready and Childs alone, freezing to death, surrounded by burning debris, passing a bottle of scotch back and forth. Why don't we just sit here for a while? See what happens. Credits. So grim.
Both of whom wildly distrustful of the other because they're not sure who is possibly infected as the Thing. I mean, there's something very Heigl about setting aside your distrust and having some scotch because you're just gonna die anyway.
So there's three endings to this. There's the one that you see, and then the original ending that Lancaster wrote. Carpenter said his original ending had McCready and Childs turning into the Thing and being rescued in the spring. Carpenter's account of Lancaster's original ending in his creative screenwriting interview is this. His original ending had both McCready and Childs turning into the Thing and being rescued in the spring. The helicopter lands and they both come out and say, "Hey, which way to a hot meal?" I thought, no, let's not do that. It was a little too glib.
And at some point, the film's editor, Todd Ramsey, approached John Carpenter and suggested a more concrete ending, which they shot. John Carpenter later said it wasn't a happier ending. This is him talking to Creative Screenwriting Magazine. It was one shot of Kurt Russell having survived, and what we would have had to do was fade out or some type of title card or something. So stylistically, it would have been cheesy. We did another test ending where McCready blows up the Thing. He comes in and sits down by himself in the cold, and then you go to black. You don't have Childs coming in. There was absolutely no difference in audience reaction between that and the one we had. So the problem was inherent. The film just wasn't heroic enough. It wasn't the U.S. hockey team beating the Russians. That's what people wanted to see.
Which is funny because Kurt Russell was later in Miracle.
Oh, yeah.
There's another ending, too, that's on the DVD, the home release, where basically Jed the wolf dog runs out of the camp again, and you're like, oh my God, it turned back into a dog.
He can't keep getting away with this.
Yes. So there are multiple theories, fan theories, about whether or not Childs or McCready are the Thing at the end. And there is one interpretation here that is Dean Cundy's fault, because in the blood test scene, which gets me every time, I forgot to talk about this earlier, the editing in that scene is so pitch perfect, the way that he establishes a rhythm of the wire going into the blood and it's sizzling, and then there's like a horrible jump scare like that interrupts that rhythm. It's just such a chef's kiss of editing. And so what Dean Cundy did was actually give a hint away in that, which is, you know, when you're lighting these scenes and you have a bit of the source light reflected in the character's eyes, he actually, what he said is, the guy we're most suspicious of when he's seen, I didn't put the eye light in his eyes. I didn't put that little sparkle that we get most of the time on characters to create the sense of life, of intelligence. I kept the light out of his eyes, so his eyes were the ones that were dark and dead. I think just subconsciously the audience sensed that. It wasn't until years later that I said, okay, well, let me tell you what I did. And people said, oh yeah, now I noticed. So people have gone back and analyzed that scene, the ending scene, and been like, oh, well, you can't see the light in Childs' eyes or whatever. And they're like, so he has to be the Thing. But Cundy told Sci-Fi, and this was just in September of 2022, so as far as I'm concerned, this is the last word on this. He said he only did that in the blood test scene. He did not light and shoot the final scene of the movie with that tell, if you want to call it that, in there. So, joke's on you, internet.
And there's another theory about this that's really interesting that comes down to the fact that Child's breath can't be seen in the air in the final scene. But Keith David said that's just because the wind would have been blowing around the fires at that point, and that's why you can't see his breath. John Carpenter, also speaking to Sci-Fi in September 2022, said, I know who the Thing is in the end. I know, but I'm not telling you. As for the fan theories, I appreciate them, but they don't know what the hell they're talking about. There are some hilarious ones, blah, 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 on and on. I'm not speaking about it anymore.
exhale cigarette.
Yeah, wait,
Nah.
can you deliver that? I feel like you could deliver that
Just-
better than I did.
Just get out of my way. The Warriors are on.
Yeah.
I haven't beat the water level in Sonic yet. I have another album due for Sacred Bones.
On the DVD commentary for The Thing, Kurt Russell and John Carpenter chalk a lot of that scene up to Kurt himself, including the last line, "Why don't we just wait here for a little while and see what happens?" John Carpenter recalled in creative screenwriting, there was one young gal who asked, "Well, what happened in the very end? Which one was the thing and which one was the good guy?" And I said, "Well, you have to use your imagination." And she said, "Oh God, I hate that."
Yeah. Talking about beginnings and endings, tops and tails, if you will. Quick mention of the title sequence, which has that title that kind of appears. That was special optical effects supervisor Peter Curran. He undercut Roger Corman's New World Pictures by bidding just 20 grand for it. And as he told Sci-Fi, Curran told Sci-Fi, "I can actually say that I beat Jim Cameron out for a job by doing that." And how he did that opening scene, or that title, he said, "What I did for the effect was I took a fish tank that was about 4 feet by 2 feet, filled it with smoke, and then on the back of the tank, I put the title drawn on an animation cell. Behind that, I had a piece of plastic garbage bag that I stretched over the frame, and behind that, I had a light pointing through the letters. So when I photographed it, I put a flame from a match up to the plastic. The plastic would burn and let the light through the letters. And so that's all being filmed through the fish tank filled with smoke." And so he said, "That was a simple process, but we went through a lot of takes. One take only formed the letters NG, which is especially funny because on a film set, pieces of equipment that are not working are labeled NG or NFG for not good or no effing good." And he used the fish tank, he told Sci-Fi, because he had attempted the same effect with salt, heater, and sugar on Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, but he did it not in a fish tank and filled the entire building with smoke.
Live and learn.
Yeah. Live and learn on the set of Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan. John Carpenter famously and usually scores his own films, which he did initially because he was so poor. He said he started scoring them on an Assault on Precinct 13. He was like, I think he did the whole score for that in like 8 hours or like 12 hours of studio time because he had cut as many corners as he could on that to save up for all the Panavision and film stock that he wanted to use for it. So he was like, I know synths, so I will do all this myself. But he said that Cohen in the studio did not ask him to do the score for The Thing, but he loved, as a Western fan, he loved Ennio Morricone. Supposedly, when he married Adrienne Barbeau, he walked down the aisle to Morricone's score for Once Upon a Time in the West. But in keeping with tradition of people not wanting to have anything to do with the movie The Thing, Ennio Morricone turned them down twice until Stuart Cohen called his good friend Bernardo Bertolucci to put in a good word. Friend of the pod, Bernardo Bertolucci, to put in a good word for him. And Carpenter traveled to Rome to work with Ennio Morricone on the score. Ennio Morricone famously, despite working in Hollywood for decades, never learned how to speak English, so this was all through a translator. He said, did not show him the film. He told Entertainment Weekly this in 2020 when Morricone died. We hadn't done it yet, so I just talked to him about it, discussed it with him. The film came later. Carpenter later told IndieWire, it was all way too flourishy and ornate. I said to him, Ennio, use less notes. Which is hell of the brass balls on John Carpenter to tell Ennio friggin' Morricone to use less notes. But Morricone did. The synth parts that he used on this were some of his actually earliest experiments with synthesizers. He did that in Rome, and then he traveled to LA to record the orchestral parts. And he did 20 minutes of it and basically gave it to production, gave it to Carpenter, was like, do whatever you want. Carpenter told his biographer, Ennio did all the orchestrations and recorded for me 20 minutes of music I could use wherever I wished, but without seeing any footage. I cut his music into the film and realized there were places, mostly scenes of tension in which his music would not work. Since we needed something, I secretly ran off and recorded in a few days a few pieces to use. Not really music at all, but just background sound effects. In no way was I trying to compete with Ennio's score. The score is his. The whole thing about only recording 20 minutes of music is so funny to me because that is what he did to Quentin Tarantino for Hateful Eight, which is the film that he finally won an Oscar for. I guess he gave him, his contract included 25 minutes of music for Hateful Eight, which is like 2 hours long. So famously, parts of the Hateful Eight score include parts of the score that he did for The Thing. So there's the Kurt Russell connection, there's the Ennio Morricone connection, and there's a literal sonic connection between Hateful Eight and The Thing in that parts of the score are shared in both movies because you only get 25 minutes of Ennio, and then he's going back to Rome, and he's not learning English for your movie. And fun fact that I learned about this, the Flamin' Groovies, garage rock, underground not really avant, famous underground garage rock band, the Flamin' Groovies, played the rap party for The Thing at the Roxy in Hollywood.
Is John Carpenter a big fan, or?
John Carpenter loves rock and roll. Have you ever heard his band, the Coupe de Villes?
No.
Oh, you haven't seen this music video? How have I not sent this to you? The score for Big Trouble in Little China is famously like not all atmospheric synths. It's like supposed to sound like 50s rock and roll. And boy, this music video, it's him and like Tommy Wallace, who's I think was like one of the guys who's worked on Halloween.
You can feel the wind is rising, baby. Now the truth is here.
Yeah, John Carpenter said that he loves the Beatles.
And that's it.
Why no Warren Zevon? Obviously Ennio Morricone, but apparently also Katy Perry. I just found an interview in which he said that he liked Roar by Katy Perry, which is the worst thing I've ever heard. I wish I hadn't read that.
Yeah, wow.
Someone Eternal Sunshine that memory out of my mind.
Was he kidding?
No.
What's his evidence for liking that?
She's a cool girl, a great performer, and she knows how to deliver a song. She has an innate talent. It's a girl empowerment song, and I appreciate that. I like that song. There you have it. You got it out of me.
If it was anything on Teenage Dream, I would have been okay with it because that album kind of bangs. Roar sucks. Wow. Oh, damn.
How the mighty have fallen. Oh, yeah, this was to Pitchfork. Oh.
I could see him doing that to try to prick any kind of pomposity that might have come through from the interviewer, maybe.
I guess that's true. Yeah. Oh, man. This was in 2017.
Wow.
The theme to Dragnet came up.
That's a great theme.
Skeeter Davis. Oh, my God. This is so funny.
The End of the World?
Yeah, Skeeter Davis. He says, my dad was a music professor, but he was also a session musician in Nashville. And he played on Skeeter Davis' The End of the World. He says, I don't know what you call this. It's a pretty song. Country music? Pop music? Start singing. Don't they know it's the end of the world? And then just the last line is, I'm not going to sing this
I want you
John.
to interview him so bad.
I know. I would have to like take time off and like, I would want to go to his house. I wouldn't want to do it on like Zoom.
Yeah.
He also loves Love Train by the OJs.
Yeah.
Of course, he loves Werewolves of London and Don't Fear the Reaper, which is in Halloween. He loves Toto Africa.
That scans.
He said, the studio production is perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah. I had it at home on vinyl. Belinda Carlisle, Heaven is a Place on Earth.
Bragging about having Toto's Africa on vinyl.
He loves Boys II Men.
Ah.
He loves Candle the Wind,
surprising.
1997.
I feel like he's got to be troll. Is this all part of the Pitchfork piece?
Yeah. Frank Sinatra. I hate his voice. It irritates me. Dixie Chicks, Not Ready to Make Nice. He said he loves them. He said, I love this song because it blew up after criticizing George W. Bush. He likes Alicia Keys.
Oh, I like that.
And the last song in here is Katy Perry's Roar.
Okay.
I guess.
It humanizes. I mean, I like that. I like that he's
Yeah.
has like Michael Scott's favorite music.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Well, moving off that now and over to the sound editors portion of the program. The sound editors on The Thing were David Lewis Udall and Colin Mouet. And for the sounds that the monster made, they used recordings from animals like birds, pigs, and lions, all pitched in different directions, while the low droning sound that you hear in various scenes was actually the processed sound of an air conditioner that music editor Cliff Kowick found in a sound effects library. It's very Lynchian. Wasn't there like some kind
the
of
room
like
tone.
Yes. That was what it was. And the sounds of the dogs freaking out in the kennel were obtained in a not particularly ethical fashion. Producer Stuart Cohen wrote on his blog that one day, with the help of his kids, the sound editor Colin Mouat rounded up all the neighborhood dogs and locked them in his house with a tape recorder running. It's wrong for all sorts of reasons, but it gets worse. He then donned an overcoat and a hat that covered his face and walked around the house tapping on windows and rattling doorknobs. So
Awful.
the secret ingredient to the sounds in this movie were dog cruelty.
Why is Colin going around rounding up the neighborhood dogs? It's movie stuff. Sure.
Wait, your dog could be in a movie?
Yeah. I'm just gonna torture him for a little while. God.
Wow. And now I'm just trying to figure out if there's like a no animals were harmed message on the end of this, you know?
Well, I mean, they wanted to show that they didn't actually split any dogs open to the Humane Society, so they let them on the set. But I guess he didn't tell them in post. Yeah, I psychologically abused a bunch of dogs for this. John Carpenter's there just chain smoking, like, be meaner to the dogs. Yeah, really bang on the windows. Play Katy Perry.
Alexa, play Katy Perry.
They hate that.
Yeah. Well, now let's talk about the famously troubled release of this movie. The Thing got a pretty decent advertising campaign, which is why there's so much about it in Starlog and Fangoria magazine at the time. Part of this promotional campaign included a Draw the Thing contest, which challenged fans to draw the monster off of a graph from the original story to win a visit to Universal and the set.
It's pretty cool, I gotta say. Some of
Yeah?
the stuff that people came up with is like pretty good, honestly. You know, the winner. I found the winner for it online. Oh man, should put this on Twitter. Podcasting as a medium is failing me. I want you to see the winner. No, it's not very good actually.
Oh. It's like Medusa with 3 eyes. No, do not want.
Oh, John Carpenter picked that. I just found it in the original Fangoria. Oh man.
I mean, you know what? I mean, I guess it would be kind of embarrassing and bad if you picked something that was better than whatever you had in your movie. So maybe he picked one of the worst ones.
Yeah,
So
that's right.
I mean, yeah.
Yeah, look at this piece of shit. Ugh. Movie's gonna look great by comparison. Yeah, this guy's the winner. I don't know why I make him sound like Norm Macdonald's Burt Reynolds impression. That's just how John Carpenter talks.
That's exactly what it was. Yeah, scary monster. Yeah.
Yeah, look at this
thing.
piece of shit. Yeah. Yeah, bring him back to the studio. I don't know, I'll sign it. And Fangoria to say, though the contest winner has no professional experience as an illustrator.
But the team behind The Thing actually hated the poster art that was done by movie poster legend Drew Struzan.
Yeah.
Who, as you say, is basically the guy for that style of full color hand drawn poster art. He did Shawshank Redemption, Blade Runner, Indiana Jones, Back to the Future, and the Star Wars franchises.
He's still working, but you like when you see these posters, when you imagine like those big, beautiful lobby, you're picturing a Drew Struzan illustration. I mean, the guy is just they're works of art, you know.
But I guess the team behind the movie did not like it because they felt like it reduced their movie to a generic slasher style look, which is kind of true.
Hmm.
And while they did love one of the taglines for the film, "Man is the warmest place to hide," and that was written by Stephen Frankfurt, who also came up with the immortal "In space, no one can hear you scream" for Alien. The other tagline that got used for the thing was "The ultimate in alien terror," which, as you can probably guess, was the work of a non-creative executive, Universal president Sid Sheinberg, who was, I guess, desperate to shoehorn in the word alien to capitalize on Ridley Scott's film.
Aliens are hot right now. Gotta get an alien in there. Yeah, man, it just boggles my mind. This movie bombed so hard. So hard.
I mean, I liked it a lot more than I thought I would, but for some reason, all the graphics I'd seen of it, and it's not positioned very well, even down to the name.
Terrible name.
Yeah,
I've never. Yeah, what does that tell you about anything? And even the poster too. Like you look at the poster, and you're like, it's a guy with a astronaut shiny light face. Tells you nothing about it. Yeah, but it just, people were so mean to it. Even critics like Harlan Ellison, who's the guy who wrote Demon with a Glass Hand, which is like sort of maybe the inspiration for Terminator. He's a really legendary sci-fi author. He called it Drek. Roger Ebert said it didn't have anything going for it beyond the special effects. Vincent Canby said it's basically as much as the same in the New York Times. And then this is what really bums me out. The director of the 51 film, Christian Nyby, was still alive and dissed it. He said, if you want blood, go to the slaughterhouse. And then he just called the movie a terrific commercial for J&B Scotch. And then an actor from that film, Kenneth Tobey, said the visual effects were so explicit that they actually destroyed how you were supposed to feel about the characters. And if that's the argument that you want to make about the movie, that the effects are too good and they take away from everything else, I mean, I guess that's what people are saying about Avatar, but I don't get that from the thing. It's still, even just the editing and pacing, and as you mentioned, the writing, the character beats are so good. But yeah, man, flopped. And, timing is everything, and they did not have good timing.
No, they faced incredibly stiff competition in 1982 when it was released. Steven Spielberg's E.T., most notably, was kind of a much more popular choice of extraterrestrial being. There was also Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, and Ridley Scott's Blade Runner, which opened on the same day as The Thing. And after just 3 weeks, The Thing grossed only $13.8 million on a $10 million budget plus advertising, which Cohen said was about $3.5 million. So all totaled, this meant that this was John Carpenter's first big bomb. And multiple people involved with the production have blamed the failure, as I said, on E.T., saying that audiences clearly preferred a cuddly, cute alien that teaches people how to love or thereabouts.
Is that what E.T. does? Would you say that?
I never liked E.T.
Oh, really?
No.
Good.
Yeah, I've seen it a lot.
Yeah, me neither. Not really. Not my speed.
No.
I take every failure hard, Carpenter told Time Out New York in 2008. The one I took the hardest was The Thing. I don't think the studio knew what kind of movie they were getting. I think they wanted Alien, a crowd pleaser, and it was way too ferocious for them. They were upset by the ending. Too dark. But that's what I wanted. Who goes there? Who are we? Which one of you is real? The movie was hated, even by science fiction fans. They thought I had betrayed some kind of trust, and the piling on was insane. I think the social climate in the country at that time had a whole lot to do with it, he expounded on to creative screenwriting. There was a recession underway, and people rejected its downbeat, depressing view of things. They didn't like the horrible inevitability of the movie. And then, taking an admirably sanguine view of things, he said, but look, I was just a skinny kid from Kentucky who came to Hollywood, and I got real lucky in my life. If you want to play in the big leagues, you've got to be ready for the hits. So that was my first big one. I'd gotten bad reviews before, but I had some successes. I'd been built up a little bit in the eyes of critics, and now they wanted to swap me back. And I don't blame them. Whatever they want to do is fine. Depressingly, though, it's good that he can have this in the rearview mirror and think of it this way, because this did alter the entire trajectory of his career. The thing that I was struck by reading these interviews with Dean Cundey and Bill Lancaster in Fangoria and Starlog is they were both at this point already talking about working on Firestarter, which is a Stephen King adaptation and eventually came out starring a young Drew Barrymore. And John Carpenter was like, the ink was dry on his deal to do that. And he had already had this team in place and they were already doing it. And Bill Phillips, who did a draft of Firestarter, explained that what happening was the marketing folks at Universal got cold feet because the thing didn't do very well at the box office. And there were Stephen King films clogging up the pipeline and not doing very well. And they decided that since John was very good at delivering low-budget films, they would cut the budget from $27 million to $15 million. And he said, since John didn't have to agree to that, he didn't. And John at the time had what's called a pay or play deal, which means that even if they decide to not do your movie, you still get paid a chunk of your fee. And this guy, Bill Phillips, hilariously said, John took the money and with it bought a Bell Jet Long Ranger helicopter, which he later rented out to the LA Olympics. Just imagining John Carpenter negotiating with the Olympics for the use of his helicopter. Chain smoking the whole time. Yeah, I got a couple more payments on this synth I bought. You can use a helicopter, but fill up the tank when you bring it back.
It's like, what's the least practical thing I could buy with this money that I got for kind of a ridiculous reason? Oh, okay.
Buy a helicopter.
Yeah.
Couple of Junos, couple of Roland synths. But he eventually switched studios. He went over to Columbia to do another King adaptation, 1984's Christine, which is a great movie. And then he would, as I mentioned earlier, he did the score for Firestarter. So he came back, the 2022 version of Firestarter, which was widely panned, but he got his check for it, baby. So JC, king of getting paid regardless. I don't give a shit what your movie looks like. Kind of my whole ethos to something. You know, did the check clear? Good, it was a success. I was fulfilled by it.
Well, thankfully, The Thing has come back around and appears on multiple best of lists at this point. And John Carpenter says it's one of his favorite movies too, but clearly he's still stung by the rejection. In an AV Club interview in 2011, in response to a question about how critics had come back around on The Thing, Carpenter said, "That's too late for me. I'm an old man now. If The Thing had been a hit, my career would have been different. I wouldn't have had to make the choices that I made, but I needed a job. I'm not saying I hate the movies I did. I loved making Christine and Starman and Big Trouble in Little China, all those films, but my career would have been different." Oh,
I know, poor sweet boy. But I'm just so happy that every interview now starts with, how does it feel that people were wrong and that you made some of the best movies, some of the best horror films of all time? And I'm happy that he's alive and has been hearing that for years so that he knows that the critics were wrong. I think he's such a fascinating filmmaker, man. I think the fact that he came up loving like Westerns so much, and then kind of went into making like low budget, independent horror and sci-fi, it makes him very representative of this wonderfully like American strain of filmmaking. I mean, you know, he's from Kentucky. He went to USC when it was another thing I love about him, man. I read this interview where he was talking about how cheap it was to go to film school at USC. He was like, yeah, it was like $1,000 a semester then. Nowadays, it's insane. Like, you can't imagine going to school for that kind of stuff. And he just talks about how blown away he was that you could just go to, he was like, you mean I can go to school and then they'll let me make movies? Like, there's just such a
golly gee.
Yeah, exactly. There's just such an anti like industry dork side to him. He's just like, yeah, I just wanted to make movies, and I did.
And I win.
And I win.
And I
I'm
got a
getting paid.
helicopter.
Yeah, and I got a helicopter, and now I play synthesizers and smoke weed and play Sonic the Hedgehog. Don't bet against John Carpenter. But yeah, it's his films, particularly stuff from this really like home run streak that he had. They are so reflective of their time, but they're still so timeless, which is such a neat trick to pull off. And I mentioned earlier that we started getting this wave of think pieces about The Thing during the coronavirus lockdown, when people were just like, yep, no one trusts anymore and we're all very tired. And yeah, he's just, that's a really rare talent for a filmmaker to be able to do stuff like that. And I love this quote that he has, this oral history he did for the Museum of Pop Culture. He told them, in a sense, there are two basic horror stories. One, we're a tribe sitting around a campfire, and the tribal elder or the witch doctor or the medicine man or the priest, the religious leader, he's telling us over the fire in a circle, he's telling us about evil. He says, I can tell you where evil is from, where it hides, where it is. It's out there. And he points outside the circle, into the darkness, into the trees, into the ridges beyond where we're sitting. In the second story, he says, I'm going to tell you where evil is. It's here, in the human heart. We're all capable of evil under the right circumstances. That second story is harder to tell because it's more disturbing. It's more disturbing to the audience. The first one is easier and more fun, but the second one says a lot about humanity. And in The Thing, he did both. And that is just, yeah. I mean, I know horror is not everybody's cup of tea, but it's just great filmmaking. It's great storytelling. And if nothing else, I hope that's what everyone takes away. And it's great, wet puppetry. So if nothing else, I hope that's what everyone takes away from it. This has been Too Much Information. I've talked myself hoarse, yelling about one of my favorite movies. Thank you for taking this journey with me. My name's Alex Heigl.
And I'm Jordan Runtagh. And as a non-horror person, I do urge all of you who have not seen this incredible movie, check it out. I enjoyed it myself. We'll catch you next time.
Too Much Information was a production of iHeartRadio.
The show's executive producers are Noel Brown and Jordan Runtagh.
The show's supervising producer is Michael Alder June.
The show was researched, written, and hosted by Jordan Runtagh and Alex Heigl.
With original music by Seth Applebaum and the Ghost Funk Orchestra. If you like what you heard, please subscribe and leave us a review. For more podcasts on iHeartRadio, visit the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows.